Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards, where no ship is safe from being called a piece of ship.
In the spirit of radical candor, this episode and its advertiser were supposed to come out 2 weeks ago. Well, 2 weeks ago would have been a really awkward time to drop this episode, and specifically the advertiser. But you know what? I think we're far enough past that now that we're going to go ahead and do it. Right now. Right here. Here you go. It'll be kind of funny, I guess, in retrospect. One of these days, we are going to have to talk about the absolutely insane story of the RMS Carpathia and what she did to get to the Titanic in time to save a lot of people. But in the meantime, imagine that instead of scrambling across miles and miles of ocean, imagine that you were somehow mysteriously transported back in time to the exact moment when the Titanic was sinking. That is the premise of this week's sponsor, the book Timewreck, Titanic by Rhys Davis. In fact, yes, it does ask all the interesting questions that would come out of that kind of scenario. First and foremost, how do you get back to your own time? And how do you know that anything you do back then will change anything, or should you change anything, because it might change things in the future? I mean, consider how many lives were lost in the Titanic, and if you somehow rescue more of them, what kind of ripple effect will that have on history / your future / the Titanic's future / time travel is confusing. Time travel is even more confusing when the device responsible for it had an unpatched Y2K bug, but that's in the book. You should go read it. Either way, I'm pretty sure the Titanic and the people who got teleported back in time to save it or not would have loved to have some kind of iceberg CIWS system, a close-in weapon system to keep the icebergs away. And behold, one of the worst segues ever on this channel. Because we are, after all, the king of horrible segues. Anyways, this episode, I'm gonna say some stuff that's gonna upset some people. Technically, I suppose I should apologize for that, but why would I start now? So, anyways, CIWS. No, shockingly, it does not involve urinating in the ocean for the most part. Instead, that is how you pronounce the acronym CIWS, Close-In Weapon System. So yes, anytime anyone ever says CIWS system, just like I did earlier in this episode, it is exactly like saying ATM machine. Yeah, English is weird. What are close-in weapon systems used for? Amusingly, not for close-in combat per se. They're more of an active defense system. They are most of your Navy's solution to the problem of ship killer missiles. If you can't convince them to go somewhere else with decoys or chaff or whatever the hell else, you shoot them down. They're kind of the modern version of a flak cannon, only instead of targeting aircraft, although they can target aircraft, they're predominantly used for missiles. And I did kind of lie a little bit by saying shoot it down. The problem with CIWS, one big caveat with CIWS systems, did it again, is that most of them have engagement envelopes of 1 to 2 miles. And when you're trying to shoot at something moving at supersonic speed, so at least 800 miles per hour, in other words, about 1/4 of a mile a second, yeah, you're going to cause the missile to disintegrate, but those disintegrated little bits are still going to be moving in the same direction and only marginally losing speed over time. So yeah, your ship is still going to get splattered by what was a missile and will hopefully no longer go off, but it's basically the Armageddon problem, where if you set off the nuke too close to the Earth gets scattered with bits anyways. In other words, nobody wants to be outside the skin of the ship when the CIWS is going off. That's just a recipe for bad. In fact, nobody wants to be in a ship when CIWS is going off, because that's pretty much an indication that things have gone horribly, horribly wrong. But anyways, the current reigning king of CIWS on your planet is basically unquestionably the Phalanx CIWS being put out by your United States and mounted on their Navy warships. And here comes the part that's going to upset some people. It kinda sucks. Now, that's not to say it's not the best on your planet. It possibly is. And that's not to say that it doesn't have good points. It does. And we're actually going to talk about those first. But we're going to loop back to the suckiness later. Okay, so what makes the Phalanx system so awesome? Well, first off, it's R2-D2 with a hard-on. I mean, pretty much that answers the entire question in its entirety right then and there, period, dot. Even if you don't like that particular reference, you're basically giving an R2-D2 a 20mm Gatling that throws out saboed, armored-piercing tungsten penetrator rounds at a rate of somewhere between 3,000 and 4,500 rounds per minute at a velocity of 3,600 feet per second. Yeah, you gave R2-D2 a WMD. I mean, not technically. WMDs have a technical definition that does not involve Gatlings, but still, can you imagine R2 with a I mean, that's the whole answer right there. But no, okay, fine. That's not the whole answer. The real reason that the Phalanx is so awesome is that it actually combines two different radar systems and then this not quite AI determination system behind it. So the radar, it has both a search and a tracking radar. And basically when it is in its standby but active mode, it's constantly looking out for things. And it's constantly keeping track of things. And basically one of the first things that the not AI does is that thing getting closer to the ship? If it's not getting closer to the ship, it's not a problem. So I don't care. The next thing it tries to figure out is whether or not the thing is capable of actually maneuvering to hit the ship. This is a very complicated math problem that the little computer inside the CIWS and inside the Combat Information Center where the CIWS is controlled try to figure out. They basically try to apply physics and modern understanding of enemies' weapon systems and try to figure out that, okay, fine, if something is going at like Mach 10, just barely towards the ship at like 4 miles away, it's probably not going to be able to turn hard enough to be able to hit the ship. Okay, probably not a problem either. And then if the thing has passed all those gates, it tries to determine if the thing is moving between maximum and minimum velocities that it considers valid targets. Yeah, they put a maximum velocity on what it considered to be a valid target. That we'll loop back to that, but the minimum velocity actually makes sense. You don't want CIWS trying to shoot down a seagull or something. Which brings us to the tracking radar. See, the dome on top of the cylinder of the CIWS system, the Phalanx system, actually has what you probably consider a classic radar system. It's the spinny dish that goes out there and sweeps the horizon and looks for anything. The thing you may not know is that military vessels, ships, and aircraft, and almost everything, have typically two distinct types of radar. There is the whoop, whoop, whoop sweep kind that goes out there and looks for something, and then there's the targeting radar that specifically just radar beams so hard and so fast at something to get good range, good bearing, good everything you can just from locking onto that target. And in fact, that is typically what alerts most ships and most aircraft that something is targeting them. Instead of intermittent radar signals, suddenly they're getting a very solid radar signal that is very, very interested in them. Well, the targeting radar on the Phalanx is good. Really, really good. You have no idea how good it is. But before we get there, like I said, the search system has been keeping track of things in its immediate area. And if anything comes within about 4 miles that it thinks might be concerning, it sends up a flag on its control console in the Combat Information Center on the warship and says, hey, look, there's a thing. I'm going to keep an eye on it, just letting you know. And the watch officer, the guy in charge of it, goes, okay, cool. And the computer just keeps on watching it. Now, if it determines that it's an actual threat, and it comes close to 1-ish miles away, and all these miles are nautical miles, which are slightly longer than statute miles, but is really irrelevant to the point, either the CIWS will automatically engage it itself if you gave it that level of autonomy, or it will send up a really massive flag with blinking lights and sirens and everything and say, please let me shoot it, please let me shoot it, please let me shoot it. The good news is that the automated version of that decision tree, yeah, it'll just identify it, target it, and shoot it down, no problems asked. The please let me shoot it branch, the human reaction time is so appreciably slow that it's hard to say whether or not that would actually be a successful shoot down. But there are scenarios where you can't just let this thing make up its own mind and shoot down whatever it wants. So, trade-offs. But when the CIWS starts shooting, that's when it really starts to shine, the Phalanx specifically. The original version of the Phalanx, the Block 0, if I understand correctly, used kind of a raster system like your old CRT monitors and your old tube televisions used to do. It would identify the direction of the target and kind of make this square of solid bullets. Eventually one of them's going to hit, right? And that may still be an option on the Block 1 and Block 1A and Block 1B systems, but that's not really where it shines. Remember that tracking radar that I told you about? Not the search radar, the tracking radar that was so ridiculously good? Yeah, it's so ridiculously good that it can actually track those subcaliber tungsten darts that it fires individually and do the math and see that, oh, oops, I'm shooting 6 inches high. Let me correct that. And it can literally walk its own rounds into the target by tracking them individually as they fly through the air in excess of Mach 3 and like hundreds of them. It's tracking each one and going, oh, I need to correct until it finally hits the target. And regardless of whether the CIWS was on full automatic or whether it had the human had to push the button setting going on, that whole correction thing is automatic. It's doing this while it's shooting for every single round. It's actually tracking the round and doing the very complicated math and adjusting for the next round at 4,500 rounds per minute. That's literally 75 rounds per second and is doing all those calculations. It is impossible to describe to you how many rounds that thing is firing in any comprehensible way for that jelly you do all your thinking with. The noise is just one continuous stream of BERT! Okay, that all sounds pretty awesome, right? But wait, there's more. The Block 1 Bravo improvement on the Phalanx system actually strapped an infrared camera to its side and gave the operator in the Combat Information Center a joystick and a trigger. Why, you ask? Because like I said, humans are really slow. They can't shoot down missiles by eye. Well, no. Basically, Big Navy realized that U.S. Navy warships are sorely under-equipped for engagements against, swarms, small boats, bog hammers, things that can carry a lot of RPGs and do a lot of damage to the thin-skinned modern warships that you have on your planet right now. So they gave Phalanx a surface engagement mode. The operator in Combat Information Center has a nice little screen, and he can pull up the FLIR, the forward-looking infrared camera bolted onto the side of R2-D2, and identify an enemy surface vessel and light it the f*** up. Now, the bad news is that the auto-aiming feature of the Phalanx doesn't apply in this case. It is stabilized for rolls, so that the camera and the gun mount are shooting the way you expect them to, regardless of how the ship is moving, but it takes a little practice to be able to get good with it. The FLIR camera was also tied into the targeting system for low-speed aircraft and coupling into a different CIWS system that your United States Navy has started using, but basically it was for surface engagements, because that's all kinds of fun. All right, fine. Have I covered all the awesomeness yet? Nope! Because someone finally realized that the Phalanx system is kind of modular. I mean, it's basically just like a bolt-on feature for the warships. It doesn't have any kind of like significant equipment underneath it inside the skin of the ship. There is some, but it's not a big deal. You basically just strap it onto the ship and off you go. Well, fine. Why can't we strap it onto a flatbed and put a generator behind it and power it, and we can use it on the ground? And behold, CRAM was born, which is a really confusing acronym. CRAM actually stands for Counter Rocket Artillery Mortar Initiative. They kind of dropped the I. And instead of being called Phalanx anymore, the CRAMs are called Centurion, because we got to keep with the theme, right? Anyways, this CRAM, the Centurion one, is used by your United States Army and a few other ground-based people. The problem is that there is another CRAM that is spelled SEARAM, and it combines the R2-D2 section with a RAM missile launcher. Because we can't make this not confusing, can we? But we're not talking about that CRAM, we're talking about this CRAM. Yeah, Totally not confusing. Anyways, someone figured that the Phalanx system was so good at shooting down missiles, why couldn't it shoot down mortars and rockets and so on and so forth for terrestrial battles? Turns out it works really, really well. Your United States used them quite extensively in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan with great success. So win. Okay. I've got to be done singing the Phalanx's praise now, right? Yep, I'm done. Now's where the story goes off the rails. Yeah. Oh, where do I start? I guess the easy place to start is the logic system used to identify targets. You will notice that I mentioned whether or not the target is moving towards the ship, whether or not it is capable of maneuvering into the ship, and whether or not it's between minimum and maximum velocities, right? Okay. Did you miss what I didn't mention? Well, maybe not, because I'm not actually sure how many of you have actually served in your planet's military. Most aircraft, vessels, submarines, and tanks and armored personnel carriers, and most vehicles in your planet's militaries have something called an IFF transponder, Identify Friend or Foe. It's basically an electronic way of saying that, hey, I'm friendly. It broadcasts a signal that can be changed and is changed frequently just to confuse the enemy, that identifies you as being friendly to a system looking at you. Phalanx doesn't have a receiver for that. It doesn't care. There is some logic behind this, because if anyone was ever able to spoof a friendly IFF signal, it would shut down Phalanx and it wouldn't shoot something down that it probably should have. On the other hand, on June 4th, 1996, an A6E intruder towing a target was engaged in RIMPAC, that is to say the Rim of the Pacific exercises, and was flying over a Japanese destroyer armed with a Phalanx system, and was towing a target that the Japanese destroyer was supposed to engage. The destroyer's Phalanx instead locked on to the A6E intruder and shot the shit out of it. Thankfully, both the pilot and the navigator were able to eject and were recovered from the ocean and suffered only superficial wounds, but this is one of the problems of the lack of IFF system. Phalanx neither knows nor cares if you are friendly or not. It will shoot you down regardless of either, if it is given the opportunity to or the go-ahead. And this is why most Phalanx systems are not operated in fully automatic mode. Most of them have the human has to push the button setting engaged, which again reduces reaction time when we're talking about missiles that are coming in at obscene speeds. See, the trade-offs here are not always optimal because, again, the human has to confirm the decision, and humans, as you know, think slow and push buttons slower. And if he doesn't push the button fast enough, the ship dies. But what if he pushes the button wrong and he doubts himself, and what if he shoots down another friendly aircraft, and oh my god, lock up. Yeah. It's a hell of a thing that y'all built the pretty much best automated shoot-down system ever, and you can't trust it. And in fairness, part of that lack of trust was actually for a pretty decent reason, which brings us to the second significant problem with the Phalanx system, and that is to say its logic gates. Remember how I talked about how targets had to satisfy certain constraints in order for the Phalanx system to consider them eligible to be shot down? Well, knowingly or not, the Soviets actually accidentally, possibly maybe accidentally, hard to say, found one of the gaps in that logic by way of a missile that they refer to as the P-270 Musket, which the NATO system referred to as the SS-N-22 Sunburn, except that particular designation can actually be applied to two different missiles because apparently both missiles were carried around in the same container and it was unclear which missile was where and doing what. So we're just going to call it the Musket because Sunburn is too complicated. Anyways, the Musket is a big ol' honker of a missile, about 10 meters in length, powered by 4 ramjets. No, I did not stutter. It is actually powered by 4 ramjets. It could carry about 150 kilograms of a conventional explosive or a 120 kiloton fission-fusion thermonuclear warhead, because that's concerning, and had an operational range of somewhere in the 120 to 250 kilometer range. It was one of the sea skimmers. It stayed about 20 meters off the ground and maintained about Mach 2, 3 plus. The problem is, think back to those logic gates I told you about for the Phalanx system. Yes, the missile's incoming. Obviously, it's a target that could hit the ship. Wait a second. The missile's making really hard turns, like 10G turns. Nothing can make 10G turns and survive. That's clearly not a target. Ignore. And then the missile hits the ship and destroys it. Because yeah, that was the terminal maneuvering system for the Musket. Once it got within about 9 kilometers of its intended target, it just started pulling the most crazy S-turns ever. I guess nominally to avoid being shot down, but it not only avoided being shot down because, of course, things doing S-turns are harder to shoot, but the S-turns were so hard that the logic built into the Phalanx did not believe it was a valid target anymore. This seems like a massive programming oversight, which in fairness was corrected, but what other logic gaps are there in the structure of the Phalanx targeting system that some other missile could stumble into or exploit? After all, it's only as smart as the humans who programmed it, and let's be honest here. And speaking of smart, another significant flaw, arguably, with the Phalanx system is that it co-locates the radar system and the gun emplacement. Literally, the radar system is mounted on top of the gun emplacement. So if a round were to take out one, it's almost guaranteed to take out the other. Now, in fairness, this is something of a systemic problem among CIWS systems across the globe. Some notable exceptions include the Soviet AK-630 system, which I can only assume is what happens when an AK-47 finally grows up. But honestly, as we said earlier, Soviet systems are pretty much guaranteed to not work at this point. Also, notably, it appears the Italian Dardo system uses basically a separate tracking system and a gun system that are disjoint. And also the Rheinmetall GDM-008, which I guess is 007's older brother, made by the Swiss, also uses a separate gun turret and a separate tracking system. Why are the Swiss making ship guns? They have no coasts! Now, yes, co-locating your fire control tracking system and your gun make all the math so much easier, especially when you plan on tracking each individual bullet as it goes down range. But you'd think they could at least, interlink the Phalanx systems in case one gets damaged but the gun still works. Oh well. Now, one thing that the Phalanx system does have that sets it apart from most of its competitors is an enormously large magazine. In fact, it holds 1,550 rounds. The only really in-service CIWS system out there that holds more rounds is the Soviet Kashtan, and it has two 2,000-round magazines one magazine for each of its two guns. But again, Soviet systems don't appear to work so well, so we're going to kind of ignore that for the time being. The kicker is that 1,550 rounds or not, it takes somewhere between 100 and 500 plus rounds an engagement to shoot down a single missile. So congratulations, you're good for hopefully 3 missiles, hopefully more, but oh boy. But okay, fine, it has a magazine. You just drop off the magazine, you install a new one, and off you go to the races, right? Right. Well, technically now, yes, but the early Block 0 system, well, okay, I guess I have to back up. The thing about the Phalanx system is a byproduct of the United States Navy, I suppose. It does use cased ammunition, and since the Navy doesn't want to waste anything, it doesn't just eject the empty cases. While it is taking in ammunition from the magazine and shooting off the rounds, it's feeding the empty cases into the back of the drum so that they can be stored and recovered and refurbished and reloaded in the future. Recycling is great and all, but the original Block Zero system, you had to literally empty out all of the empty cases out of the drum and then load in the new 1,550, well, actually 989 rounds in that case, I believe. You had to load all the rounds back in again into the drum and then get everything seated and working again properly. This took like half an hour for 2 guys. And in fact, this is still the preferred method for loading and unloading phalanxes outside of situations where you actually have a fresh loaded magazine cassette available. I mean, yes, the Block 1 phalanxes now have the ability to drop the whole drum and you can stick in a new one and off you go to the races. This takes a lot less than 30 minutes. Nobody actually carries them. Spare drums are expensive, man, and everyone already had the loading gear to load in the belt of ammo manually, so why not just keep doing that, right? Pencil neck paper pushing assholes. But the real kicker in all of this reloading process is that the magazine is external. I mean, yeah, obviously, the Phalanx system is mounted on the skin of the ship, but the magazine is just tacked on underneath the gun itself. Which means all of this 30 minutes, you've got 2 people outside the skin of the ship while the ship is being shot at. Now, like I said before in this episode and before on this channel, the skin of your modern warships is so thin that it probably doesn't really matter where your crew is standing or not. But that's a hell of a thing, and really sets the Phalanx apart. Most other CIWS systems actually have internal magazines, whether they're in an armored turret or whether the CIWS system actually goes into the skin of the ship as opposed to just being mounted on top of the skin of the ship, and the magazine is down there. I would imagine that having the magazine inside the skin of the ship would also speed up reloading simply because you could have a block and tackle down there or some sort of mechanism to help with the process, but I honestly don't know. But one of the other CIWS systems on your planet provides the final failure of the Phalanx system. That Phalanx system is, of course, built around the M61 Vulcan 6-barreled, air-cooled, electrically fired Gatling-style rotary cannon. It shoots 20mm rounds, although technically the Phalanx does use a sub-caliber sabot system. And it makes sense, because you've been using this exact gun on fixed-wing aircraft for over 60 years. It's a known solution. You know how it works. You know what it does. You know how to do the math for it. It's easy. But easy is not always correct. I'm sure all of my viewers are aware of yet another hydraulically driven 7-barrel Gatling-style autocannon currently being employed on a certain aircraft used by your United States Air Force. That is to say, the A-10 Thunderbolt II and the GAU-8/A Avenger. Yeah, the 30mm fucker. Well, I imagine a lot of you are under the impression that the A-10 Thunderbolt, Warthog, whatever you want to call it, is the only platform that actually uses the GAU-8. You'd be wrong. If you can believe this, the Thales Nederland company, for the Netherlands country on your planet, actually built the Goalkeeper CIWS system around the fucking GAU-8. Yes, the Dutch have a more awesome CIWS system than the Americans. And they're using an American gun. The Dutch. I shit you not. In fact, they still use a discarding sabot round with a 30mm cannon, and the sub-caliber penetrator is still bigger than what the Phalanx system shoots initially, before the sabot comes off. What? Oh, and it has IFF, and it has a below-decks magazine, and that magazine holds 1,190 rounds, so not a whole lot less than the Phalanx, and they're much bigger rounds. Look, I know you USAians believe you do everything awesome and best, but man, y'all could take some notes from some other people on your planets once in a while, right? So yeah, there it is. There's my beef with minions with a heart on. I mean, seriously, just imagine being some Somali pirate and being domed by one of those. But it is the best on your planet. It could improve a few things here and there, but I mean, it's your planet. Everything could improve a few things here and there.
And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.